If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I first started arranging my life into a series of neat, predictable boxes, that the man who would eventually shatter all of them would be Marcus Vance, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, but the dry, tight sound I reserved for things that were fundamentally impossible. Marcus was a force of nature, a loud and confident sun around which the lesser planets of our office orbited. I was Pluto, cold and distant and mostly forgotten about, which was exactly how I liked it. Or at least, it was what I had convinced myself I needed. I didn't come to this city, to this architectural firm, looking for love. I came looking for quiet, for order, for a place to disappear into my blueprints and my routines, a place where the frantic, trapped bird in my chest could finally be still. My life was a carefully curated collection of silences. The quiet hum of my computer in the pre-dawn light of my apartment. The soft scratch of my pen on drafting paper. The solitary piece of my lunch hour, spent on a park bench with a book as my only companion. I had built these walls meticulously, brick by silent brick, to keep the chaos of the world out. And Marcus Vance was chaos incarnate. He didn't walk into a room, he occupied it. His voice, a low and easy baritone, could cut through the office chatter like a hot knife. He laughed with his whole body, a startlingly genuine sound that always made my shoulders tense. He was the firm's star project manager, the guy who could charm stubborn clients and soothe disgruntled contractors with the same effortless grin. He was all broad shoulders and easy confidence, a physical presence that felt like a declaration of ownership over whatever space he was in. From my desk in the corner, I watched him. It was a secret, painful sort of hobby. I observed the way his brow furrowed in concentration during a meeting, the calluses on his hands when he'd gesture with a blueprint, the way the late afternoon sun would catch the stray strands of gold in his dark brown hair. He was a landscape I studied from a great and insurmountable distance. He was everything I was not, unguarded, loud, beloved. The distance between us was more than just the physical space of the office floor. It was a chasm. He was a senior manager. I was a mid-level architect. He was the center of every conversation. I was the polite nod at the edge of the circle. We exchanged professional courtesies, of course. Good morning, Leo. Nice work on the schematics, Vance, but they were hollow gestures, the kind of corporate white noise that fills the air without meaning anything. To him, I was just another cog in the machine, a quiet guy who did good work. That was all, and I was fine with that. I had to be, because the alternative, the thought of him ever seeing the pathetic, longing way I looked at him when he wasn't paying attention, was a kind of terror I couldn't afford to entertain. It was a crack in my carefully constructed walls, and I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that a single crack was all it would take for the whole structure to come tumbling down. So I kept my distance, I did my work, and I treated my hopeless crush like a chronic low-grade fever, a persistent discomfort I had simply learned to live with. The disruption, when it came, arrived in the form of an email on a Tuesday afternoon. It was from Mr. Henderson, the firm's senior partner. The subject line was stark, urgent. Northridge project, my stomach, an organ already predisposed to anxiety, clenched into a tight, cold knot. The Northridge Lodge was a high-profile, high-stress project, a luxury ski resort being built on a remote mountain pass. It was Henderson's baby, and the clients were notoriously difficult. The final design presentation was scheduled for Thursday on-site. The project manager, a perpetually stressed man named David, had been working himself into the ground for weeks. The email was brief. David had come down with a severe case of pneumonia. He was out of commission for at least a week. The presentation could not be moved. The clients were flying in. So I had to go. I scrolled down, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then I saw it. The sentence that rewrote my week, my month, my entire existence. Leo, your design is the core of this presentation. You'll go. Marcus Vance will accompany you to handle the client-facing side of things. Your flight and rental car are booked for tomorrow morning, Marcus Vance. I read the name 3 times, as if staring at it would somehow change it into someone else's. Anyone else's. But the letters remained stubbornly in place. I was being sent to a remote mountain lodge for what would likely be an overnight trip, with the one person on earth who could unravel me with a single, careless glance. The quiet order of my life shattered. The walls didn't just crack, they exploded, and all I could feel was the terrifying rush of open air. The next morning was a blur of frantic packing and spiraling anxiety. The airport was a special kind of hell, a symphony of chaos that scraped against my already raw nerves. Marcus, of course, navigated it all with an infuriating calm. He met me at the gate, already holding 2 coffees. "Figured you could use one," he said, his voice a low rumble against the airport's din. "You look like you didn't sleep." I took the cup, my fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. It felt like an electric shock. "Thanks," I mumbled, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. He noticed I looked tired. "Don't read into it. He's just being polite." The flight was mercifully short. We worked, laptops balanced on our knees, the space between us charged with a silent, professional tension. I focused on my schematics, on the clean lines and precise angles of my design, trying to ground myself in the familiar. But I was acutely aware of him beside me. The scent of his coffee, the faint, clean smell of his soap, the way his thigh was a solid, unmoving presence just inches from my own. It was a form of exquisite torture. The real trouble started when we landed. The sky, which had been a crisp, clear blue, was now a bruised, heavy gray. Fat, wet snowflakes were beginning to fall. The rental car agent, a woman with a weary expression, eyed us grimly. "You're heading up to Northridge Pass?" she asked, handing Marcus the keys. "Roads are clear for now, but they're forecasting a big one. Blizzard warnings in effect from this evening. You boys be careful." Marcus just gave her one of his easy smiles. "We'll be fine. We're just heading to the lodge." But we weren't fine. The snow intensified as we began the winding ascent up the mountain road. What started as a picturesque flurry quickly became a blinding whiteout. The world dissolved into a swirling vortex of snow. Marcus's easy confidence finally cracked. His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his jaw tight as he peered into the near-zero visibility. "I can barely see the road," he muttered, the words a puff of white in the cold car. We crawled along for what felt like an eternity before a flashing sign forced us to a stop. "Road closed ahead." A grim-faced highway patrol officer directed us toward the only visible turnoff, a small, plowed road leading to a cluster of lights. "Lodge is another 20 miles up," the officer shouted over the wind. "No one's getting through tonight. The Pinetop Inn is your only option. They might have a room left." The Pinetop Inn was less of an inn and more of a collection of rustic, snow-covered cabins. The lobby was small and smelled of wood smoke and damp wool. The man at the front desk had the same weary look as the rental agent. "We're full up," he said, before Marcus could even speak. Everyone stranded, my heart sank. The thought of sleeping in the car was unbearable. Marcus leaned on the counter, deploying the full force of his charm. "Listen, my colleague and I have a huge presentation for the Northridge Lodge tomorrow morning. We absolutely have to be there. Is there anything at all you can do? A cot? A couch?" The man sighed, chewing on a toothpick. He tapped at his computer for a long moment. "Well," he said slowly, "I got one cancellation. Cabin 7. The furnace is a little finicky, but it works. Thing is, it's just the one bed. A queen." He looked from Marcus to me, a question in his eyes. The silence in the small lobby was deafening, broken only by the howling wind outside. "A single bed." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and impossible. My mind went completely blank. It was a scenario so far beyond the realm of what I allowed myself to imagine that I had no protocol for it. Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled out his corporate card. "We'll take it." The cabin was small, rustic, and overwhelmingly intimate. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A small kitchenette was tucked into a corner, and there, in the center of the room, sat the bed. It looked enormous, a vast expanse of white quilt that seemed to mock me. There was a worn armchair in one corner and a small 2-person table, but the bed was the undeniable focal point, the gravitational center of this sudden, terrifying new universe. "Well," Marcus said, breaking the thick silence as he dropped his bag by the door. "This is cozy." There was a strained note in his voice, a crack in the usual confident facade. I just nodded, unable to form words. I felt like I was moving through water. I set my own bag down as far from his as possible, creating a pathetic little island of personal space. The air was thick with everything unsaid. The absurdity of it. The sheer, terrifying proximity. He'd busied himself with the fireplace, his back to me. I was grateful for it. I couldn't bear to meet his eyes. I watched his hands, strong and capable, as he arranged the kindling and logs. He moved with a practiced efficiency that suggested he'd done this 100 times before. It was another small detail that didn't fit with the slick project manager I thought I knew. With the fire crackling to life, a fragile warmth began to push back against the cabin's chill. It did little to thaw the frozen knot of anxiety in my stomach. We fell into a strange, silent dance of unpacking. I took the small closet, he took the dresser. We moved around each other in the cramped space, careful not to touch, our bodies magnets repelling each other with a palpable force. Every near miss, every time our elbows almost brushed, sent a jolt through my nervous system. I escaped to the small bathroom, locking the door behind me and leaning against it, my eyes squeezed shut. Breathe, Leo. Just breathe. It's one night. It's a professional situation. It means nothing. I repeated the words like a mantra, but they were hollow, meaningless. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a pale, wide-eyed man on the verge of panic. When I emerged, Marcus was sitting at the small table, his laptop open. The mask of the project manager was back in place. The client assistant just emailed, he said, his tone all business. They're snowed in at their hotel, too. The presentation is officially postponed until the road clears. Probably Friday, I said. The word was small, inadequate. Another day. We were trapped here for at least another day. The thought was both terrifying and, to a small, secret part of me, thrilling. So, he continued, closing the laptop. I guess we have some time to kill. He looked around the small cabin, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Vulnerability? Frustration? Hope you like the smell of pine. The evening crawled by. We ordered food from the main lodge, burgers and fries that we ate in near silence at the tiny table. The forced intimacy was excruciating. I was hyper-aware of everything. The sound of his fork against the plate. The way he chewed, thoughtful and slow. The way his knee was just inches from mine under the table. I felt like a raw nerve, every sense heightened and screaming. Later, I sat in the worn armchair, pretending to read a book I'd brought, while he sat on the edge of the hearth, staring into the fire. The pages of my book were a blur. All my attention was focused on him. The firelight carved his face into a landscape of light and shadow, softening the hard lines of his jaw, highlighting the weariness around his eyes that I'd never noticed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the office. He looked younger, less like a force of nature and more like just a man, tired and stranded far from home. I noticed a small, pale scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a detail I'd never seen before. I wonder how he got it. A childhood fall? A stupid fight? It was such a human, imperfect detail. It made him feel for the first time real. Not just the object of my distant, idealized crush, but a person with a history and with scars. He finally broke the silence, his voice quiet, reflective. My dad used to take us camping in places like this, he said, still looking at the flames. Taught me how to build a fire that would last a night. The unexpected snippet of personal history caught me off guard. I've never been camping, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to look at me, then a real, genuine look, not the polite, professional glance I was used to. He was actually seeing me. Really? Never. There was no judgment in his tone, only surprise. I shook my head. My parents weren't the outdoorsy type. We did museums. Libraries, he gave a small, wry smile. Figures. You're more of a structured environment kind of guy. I bristled slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing bad, he said quickly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Just, you're precise, meticulous. The way you design, the way you organize your desk, even the way you line up your pens. It's all very controlled. My face flushed. He had noticed. He had paid enough attention to me to observe my stupid, neurotic habits. The thought was mortifying and also deeply flattering. "I just like order," I said defensively. "I know," he said, and his voice was softer now. "I admire it. My brain is not like that. The mess up here," he tapped his temple. "Chaos. I need people like you to make sense of it." The admission hung in the air between us. It was the most vulnerable thing I had ever heard him say. The power dynamic, the one that had always felt so tilted in his favor, suddenly leveled out. He wasn't just the confident project manager. He was a man admitting to his own internal chaos. And I, the quiet architect, was the one who represented order. We talked for hours after that. Really talked for the first time ever. He asked about my designs, not just the technical aspects, but my inspiration, my philosophy. I told him about my love for clean lines and natural light, for creating spaces that felt both grand and intimate. He listened, truly listened, his gaze intent, asking thoughtful questions. In turn, he spoke about the pressures of his job, the constant juggling of egos and expectations, the loneliness of being the one everyone looked to for answers. The cabin shrank around us, the storm outside fading into a distant murmur. It was just us, two men illuminated by the flickering firelight, stripping away the layers of our professional personas and revealing the people underneath. The chasm between us was closing. At some point, I moved from the armchair to the rug in front of the fire, needing to be closer to the warmth. We were sitting side by side, our shoulders almost touching, the heat from the flames washing over us. He had refilled our water glasses from the tap, and they sat on the stone hearth. I reached for mine at the same moment he reached for his. Our hands brushed. It wasn't a brief, accidental graze like at the airport. His fingers closed over the back of my hand, his thumb resting against my wrist. A jolt, pure and white-hot, shot up my arm. My breath hitched. My heart, that frantic bird, beat its wings against my ribs so hard I was sure he could feel the frantic pulse. The world stopped. There was only the crackle of the fire and the shocking, solid weight of his hand on mine. It was a brand, a claim, a question. I looked from our joined hands to his face. His eyes were dark in the firelight, his expression unreadable. He wasn't pulling away. His grip, gentle but firm, held me in place. My mind was screaming at me to pull back, to retreat to the safety of my corner, to pretend this wasn't happening. This is a mistake. He doesn't mean it. He's just being friendly. But my body betrayed me. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in the terrifying, beautiful space of that single touch. He finally broke the spell, his thumb stroking softly over my pulse point before he slowly, reluctantly, withdrew his hand. He cleared his throat and picked up his glass. "Sorry," he murmured, not looking at me. "It's okay," I whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. My skin was still burning where he had touched me. The conversation died after that. A new kind of tension filled the room, thicker and more potent than before. It was no longer the awkwardness of strangers, but the charged silence of unspoken desire. We were both acutely aware that a line had been crossed. Eventually, the unspoken issue of the bed could no longer be ignored. "I can take the floor," I offered quickly, my voice tight. "Or the chair. Don't be ridiculous, Leo," he said, his voice rough. "It's a queen bed. It's big enough. We're both adults." He said it like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. And so, we found ourselves in the most surreal situation of my life. We changed in the bathroom, one at a time, like shy teenagers at summer camp. I emerged in a t-shirt and pajama pants, my body rigid with tension. He was already in bed, on the far side, his back to me. The space in the middle felt like a mile-wide no-man's land. I slipped under the covers, my movements stiff and careful, trying not to rock the mattress. I lay on my back, staring up at the dark, wood-beamed ceiling, my body as taut as a drawn bowstring. I could feel the heat radiating from him across the sheets. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing. It was too much. It was everything. The silence stretched on, filled with the howl of the wind outside and the frantic beating of my own heart. I thought he was asleep. "Lau!" His voice was a low murmur in the dark. My heart leaped into my throat. Yeah. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer. Vulnerable. At the office, I always feel like I have to be on, the guy with all the answers. The one who can handle anything, he paused. It's exhausting. I didn't know what to say. I just listened, my entire being focused on his voice in the darkness. But with you, tonight, I don't feel like I have to be that guy. He shifted, turning to face me. I could feel the movement in the mattress, feel his body heat growing closer. You're so quiet. I used to think you were judging me, or that you hated me. I don't hate you. I whispered, the confession feeling monumental. I know that now, he said. I think I was intimidated by you, by your talent, by your quiet confidence. You don't need anyone's approval. You just are. This was so far from the truth of my anxious, insecure inner world that I almost laughed. But I knew he was describing the walls I'd built, the persona I projected. And he had seen it not as weakness, but as strength. I'm not confident. I admitted into the darkness. I am scared. Most of the time, he was silent for a beat. Then, I felt his hand on my arm, his touch gentle, hesitant. What are you scared of right now? He asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. The question was a key, unlocking a door I had kept bolted for a decade. The truth spilled out of me, a raw, ragged whisper. His hand tightened on my arm. He moved closer, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. He smelled of wood smoke and clean linen and something that was just. Marcus. Me too, he confessed, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. And then, slowly, hesitantly, he leaned in. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was a question. His lips brushed against mine, soft and tentative, asking for permission. I closed my eyes, a silent surrender passing through me, and met his kiss. It was slow. It was honest. It was the breaking of a dam inside me, a flood of feelings so intense it left me breathless. All the years of silent longing, of hopeless observation, of carefully guarded desire, poured into that single, gentle press of his lips against mine. He tasted of coffee and uncertainty and a deep, surprising sweetness. His hand moved from my arm to the side of my neck, his thumb stroking my jaw, and I leaned into his touch, my own hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, rapid beat of his heart beneath my palms. It was everything I had never let myself want, and it was happening. The morning light was a pale, gray filter through the cabin window. I woke slowly, cocooned in a warmth that was not my own. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I felt a profound sense of peace. My body was curled against another. A strong arm was draped over my waist, and my face was pressed against the steady rise and fall of someone's chest. Then memory crashed down on me. Marcus, the fire, the conversation, the kiss. My eyes flew open. I was, indeed, wrapped around Marcus Vance, and he was wrapped around me. We had fallen asleep like this, tangled together in the middle of the big bed. My panic was a cold, immediate wave. What have I done? I carefully, silently, tried to extricate myself from his hold. But the moment I moved, his arm tightened, pulling me closer. His breathing hitched, and I knew he was awake. I froze, my body rigid with a new kind of terror. The terror of the morning after. The silence in the room was a physical weight. The fire had died, leaving the cabin cold. The storm had passed, but the world outside was hushed and still, buried under a thick blanket of snow. It felt like the world had ended, and we were the only two people left. He finally released me, rolling onto his back with a quiet sigh. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the ceiling, his jaw set in a hard line. The intimacy of the night before had evaporated, replaced by a cold, awkward distance that felt 1,000 times worse than our old professional separation. I'll get the shower first, he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. He swung his legs out of bed and was gone before I could respond. I lay there, the cold air hitting my skin where his body had been, and felt a familiar, crushing weight settle in my chest. Rejection. I had been a fool. It was a mistake. A moment of blizzard-induced madness, a strange cocktail of isolation and firelight and vulnerability. It meant nothing to him, and I, in my pathetic, hopeful stupidity, had let myself believe it meant everything. He had used me, or maybe he was just confused, or maybe he was disgusted with himself. The possibilities spiraled in my head, each one more painful than the last. The self-recrimination was a bitter acid in my throat. I had broken my own rules. I had let him in, and now the walls were gone, and I was exposed and shivering in the ruins. When he came out of the bathroom, he was already dressed in his work clothes. The confident project manager was back, his armor firmly in place. He didn't meet my eyes. He just grabbed his laptop and sat at the table, tapping away as if it were any other day, as if the night before had never happened. I showered and dressed in a haze of misery. We packed in the same thick silence we had unpacked in. Only this time it wasn't charged with tension. It was heavy with regret. My regret. His. Whatever it was. Indifference? Disgust? The road was cleared by late morning. The drive back down the mountain was excruciating. Marcus turned on the radio, filling the car with meaningless pop songs, a flimsy barrier against the crushing silence. I stared out the window at the brilliant, snow-covered landscape, but all I saw was the reflection of my own miserable face. He didn't speak a single word to me that wasn't strictly necessary. Seatbelt, toll is coming up. At the airport, he dropped me at the curb. I've got to return the car, he said, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. I'll see you at the office. It was a dismissal. Clean, efficient, and brutal. He drove away without a backward glance, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with my bag and the shattered pieces of my heart. The week that followed was one of the longest of my life. My quiet solitude, once a source of comfort, was now a punishment. Every silent moment in my apartment was filled with the ghost of his presence, the memory of his voice in the dark. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was an absence. The absence of him. Work was a new kind of torture. Marcus was there, a physical presence just across the office, but he was a million miles away. He was polite, excruciatingly, professionally polite. He'd nod at me in the hallways. He'd address me in meetings with a crisp, "Good point, Leo," but the warmth was gone. The connection we'd forged in that cabin was severed. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He avoided being in the break room at the same time as me. He had erected a wall between us, higher and colder than any I had ever built. And I let him. I retreated back into my corner, into my work. I told myself it was for the best. That it was what I deserved for being so stupid, for daring to want something I couldn't have. I tried to convince myself that I could go back to the way things were, to the safety of my ordered life. But it was a lie. Something inside me had fundamentally changed. The frantic bird in my chest was no longer just trapped. It was wounded. I had tasted connection, real and raw and beautiful, and now the bland diet of my solitary existence was unbearable. The world had lost its color. I was sitting in my dark apartment a week later, nursing a glass of whiskey and trying to sketch a design that refused to come, when my buzzer rang. It was almost 11 at night. I never had visitors. My heart lurched with a sudden, irrational hope that I immediately tried to crush. It couldn't be. I walked to the intercom, my hand trembling. "Hello. Now, it's Marcus. Can you buzz me in?" His voice was rough, strained, stripped of its usual confidence. My mind raced. What does he want? To tell me to forget it ever happened? To make sure I won't tell anyone? Every possibility felt like a fresh wound. But I couldn't turn him away. I pressed the button. The knock on my door a minute later was soft, hesitant, not the confident rap I would have expected from him. I opened it to find him standing there, looking utterly wrecked. He wore jeans and a crumpled t-shirt. His hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked lost. "Hi," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Hi," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. I just stood there, clutching the doorknob, waiting for the axe to fall. He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with so much misery and regret that it stole my breath. Can I come in?" I stepped back, letting him into the quiet sanctuary of my apartment. He walked into the middle of my living room and just stood there, looking around at my ordered books, my neat stacks of blueprints, my minimalist furniture. He looked like a wild animal that had wandered into a museum. "I am so sorry, Leo," he said, his voice cracking on my name. "I'm so sorry for what?" I asked, though I knew. I wanted to hear him say it. "For everything," he said, turning to face me. "For how I acted. On the drive back. This whole week. I was a coward." The word hung in the air, a shocking admission from a man I had only ever seen as brave. I freaked out. He continued, his words coming in a rush. "What happened in that cabin? It was more real than anything I've felt in a long time. Maybe ever. And it scared the hell out of me." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. I've never even let myself think about it. My whole life has been on this one straight track. College, job, find a nice girl, get married. It's what everyone expected. It's what I expected. He took a step closer to me, his eyes pleading. And then, you, this quiet, brilliant guy in the corner who I couldn't stop watching. I told myself it was just professional admiration. But in that cabin, when the world went quiet, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. My heart was hammering, a wild drumbeat of hope against the cage of my ribs. "I ran," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I thought if I put distance between us, if I acted like it was a mistake, the feeling would go away. That I could just put it back in its box and get back on my track. But it didn't work. It's been the worst week of my life. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that cabin. I can feel you next to me. And being at the office, seeing you and not being able to talk to you, to touch you. It's been killing me." Leo, tears were welling in my eyes, blurring his image. All the pain and confusion of the past week began to melt away, replaced by a fragile, terrifying hope. I was afraid, he confessed. Afraid of what people would say. Afraid of what this means for my life. For my future. But I realized tonight, the only thing I'm really afraid of is not having you in it. Being without you is worse than any of that other stuff. He was standing right in front of me now, the space between us charged with a fragile, desperate energy. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I'm here now. And I'm not running anymore." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a moment before he gently cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "I don't want to go home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I just stay? For a while." It was more than a question about one night. It was a question about everything. It was an offer, a plea, a beginning. And this time I didn't hesitate. I didn't let the fear win. I leaned into his touch, closed my eyes, and gave him the only answer that mattered. Yes. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. Marcus stayed, not just for a while, but for good. He moved his things in slowly, piece by piece, integrating his comfortable chaos into my structured order. His worn leather jacket was suddenly slung over my perfectly placed armchair. His ridiculously large coffee mug sat next to my minimalist espresso cup on the counter. His laugh, once a distant sound from across an office, was now the first thing I heard in the morning. We were learning a new kind of language together, the language of domestic intimacy. We discovered the simple, profound joy of making breakfast together in my small kitchen, our bodies moving in an easy, familiar dance. We learned that I liked my coffee black, and he liked his with an obscene amount of sugar. We learned that he snored just a little, and that I talked in my sleep. We fell into the rhythm of sharing a life, and it was the most natural, beautiful thing I had ever experienced. Sleeping in the same bed was no longer a source of terror, but a source of profound comfort. There was no more no man's land between us. We slept tangled together, seeking each other's warmth in the night, his steady presence a constant, reassuring anchor in the dark. Waking up to find him there, his face soft in the morning light, was a quiet miracle I never got tired of. My life, once a collection of lonely, silent boxes, had been broken wide open. But it wasn't the terrifying chaos I had always feared. It was vibrant. It was warm. It was filled with a sound I was coming to realize I had been starving for. The sound of a shared life. The sound of Marcus's key in the door at the end of the day. The sound of our quiet conversations late into the night. The sound of his heart beating steadily next to mine. I looked at him one morning, standing at my kitchen counter and trying, unsuccessfully, to make pancakes, a dusting of flour on his nose. He caught me looking and gave me that easy, brilliant grin, the one that used to make my shoulders tense with longing. Now it just made my heart feel full to bursting. In that moment, I realized the blizzard, the trip I had dreaded, hadn't been a disaster. It was a disruption, yes, but it was the kind of disruption that saves you. It had forced me out of my carefully constructed cage and into the terrifying, beautiful, unpredictable world of loving someone. Marcus wasn't a force of nature I had to protect myself from. He was the partner I never knew I was waiting for. He hadn't just shattered my walls. He had shown me I didn't need them. He didn't want the quiet, orderly persona I showed the world. He wanted me, the real, anxious, meticulous, scared, and loving me. And in letting him see me, truly see me, I had finally started to see myself. I had spent a decade building a life of quiet solitude, believing it was safety. But true safety, I was learning, wasn't being alone. It was being known. If someone asked me now if I believed in fate, I still might not have a simple answer. But I do believe in the power of a single, unexpected snowstorm to change the entire landscape of a life. I believe that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most profound peace. And I believe that the quietest heart can learn to beat in time with another, creating a kind of music more beautiful than any silence. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed the trajectory of your life, a disruption that turned out to be a blessing in disguise? It's funny how the things we fear most can sometimes be the very things that set us free. Let me know your own stories in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed our journey, please consider subscribing for more stories about finding love in the most unexpected of places.